Playing with Power MTG. Powerful cards, powerful formats. Be sure to check out Dragon Shield for all of the best accessories to protect your decks. TCG Player for cards at great prices while still supporting local game stores. And Patreon, where you get awesome benefits for your direct support. We wanted to thank all the players that came to our table during MTG Vegas last year. We had an amazing time with you all. We will be attending more events as they safely come throughout the year, so stay tuned to our social media to stay up to date. Now, let's start off by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have ZACK piloting Narset Enlightened Master. This deck seeks to attack with its commander and chain extra turn or combat spells to eventually win the game. ZACK's opening hand contains Smothering Tithe, Plateau, Gemstone Caverns, Ancient Tomb, Chrome Mox, and his London Mulligans are Torch Courier and Nexus of Fate. Next, we have Jacob piloting Rashmi, Eternity's Crafter. This deck seeks to control the board while gaining card advantage through its commander, then win with a combo. Jacob's opening hand contains a Verdant Catacombs, Priest of Titania, Mox Diamond, Mental Misstep, Polluted Delta, Soul Ring, and a Rapid Hybridization. Next, we have Robert piloting Najeela, the Blade Blossom. This deck aims to pressure its opponents with Najeela, then pivot to one of several different combos. Robert's opening hand contains a Stomping Ground, Swan Song, Bayou, Pyroblast, Soul Ring, Volcanic Island, and a Wild Growth. Finally, we have ZAIN piloting the partner pair of Malcolm, Keen-Eyed Navigator, and Tana, the Bloodsower. This deck is called Teamer Pirates. It seeks to use Malcolm in conjunction with Glinthorn Buccaneer to close out the game. ZAIN's opening hand contains a Veil of Summer, Birds of Paradise, Bloodstained Mire, Gemstone Caverns, Misty Rainforest, and his London Mulligans are Court of Calling and Sudden Demise. Without further ado, let's begin this jumping, joyous juxtaposition of jokers. Robert won the kangaroo boxing match and gets to start us off. But ZAIN and ZACK have a pre-game action. ZAIN puts a Gemstone Caverns onto the battlefield with a luck counter, exiling Veil of Summer. ZACK also puts a gemstone into play with a luck counter, exiling Plateau. Robert draws and plays a Scalding Tarn. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Volcanic Island onto the battlefield. He casts a Soul Ring. In response, Jacob pays 2 life to cast Mental Misstep, countering Soul Ring. A little dismayed, Robert ends his turn. ZAIN draws and plays a Misty Rainforest. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Tropical Island onto the battlefield. He casts Tinderwall. He sacrifices Tinderwall, adding 2 red. He casts his commander, Malcolm, Keen-Eyed Navigator. He ships the turn. ZACK draws and starts off his turn by casting Chrome Mox. It enters, and ZACK imprints Force of Negation. He plays Ancient Tomb. He taps Ancient Tomb and casts a turn 1 Smothering Tithe. With his hand now completely empty, ZACK passes the turn. Jacob draws, and ZACK's Smothering Tithe triggers. ZACK creates a treasure. In his first main phase, Jacob plays a Verdant Catacombs. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Tropical Island onto the battlefield. He casts Mox Diamond. It enters, and he discards Polluted Delta. He casts a Soul Ring. All finished, he passes. Robert draws, not paying for Tithe. He plays Savannah. He casts Wild Growth, targeting Savannah. He gives the turn to ZAIN. ZAIN draws, not paying for Tithe. He moves to combat and attacks ZACK with Malcolm. ZACK takes the hit, and Malcolm triggers. ZAIN creates a treasure, and he passes the turn. ZACK draws and taps his Ancient Tomb to cast his commander, Narset Enlightened Master. To ZACK's surprise, Narset resolves, and with nothing else, ZACK ends his turn. Jacob draws, not paying for Tithe. He pays 2 life to cast Gataxian Probe, targeting Robert. Jacob looks at Robert's hand and draws a card. Tithe triggers, and ZACK creates a treasure. Jacob plays a Prismatic Vista. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up an island onto the battlefield. He gives the turn to Robert. Robert draws, not paying for Tithe. He plays a Bayou. He casts Sylvan Library. He passes. ZAIN draws, not paying for Tithe. He casts Glinthorn Buccaneer. The table braces for impact and Buccaneer resolves. ZAIN moves to combat, and in response, Jacob casts Rapid Hybridization, targeting Buccaneer. Buccaneer is destroyed, and ZAIN creates a 3/3 Frizzard. ZAIN attacks Robert with Malcolm. Robert takes the hit, and Malcolm triggers. ZAIN creates a treasure, and in his second main phase, he casts Jeweled Lotus. With nothing else, he gives the turn to ZACK. ZACK draws and moves straight to combat. He attacks Robert with Narset, and Narset triggers. The table hangs on to the edge of their seat as ZACK exiles Felwar Stone, Scalding Tarn, Polluted Delta, and Hall of the Bandit Lord, completely whiffing. Robert takes the hit, and in his second main phase, ZACK casts Felwar Stone. He taps his Ancient Tomb to cast Aminatu's Augury. In response, Robert casts Pyroblast, countering Augury. ZACK gives the turn to Jacob. Jacob draws, not paying for tithe. He casts his commander, Rashmi, Eternity's Crafter. He ends the turn. During his draw step, Robert draws 2 extra through Sylvan Library. He pays 8 life, keeping them both. Tithe triggers 3 times, and ZACK creates 3 treasures. In his main phase, Robert plays a Stomping Ground into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts his commander, Najeela, the Blade Blossom. He passes. ZAIN draws, not paying for the tithe. He casts Lotus Petal. He moves to combat and attacks Robert with Malcolm. Robert takes the hit, and Malcolm triggers. ZAIN creates a treasure, and in his second main phase, he casts Birds of Paradise. ZAIN ends his turn. ZACK draws and starts off his turn by tapping Ancient Tomb to cast Seagate Restoration. It resolves. ZACK draws 2 cards and has no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. He casts Gamble. He fetches up a card into his hand and randomly discards a Steam Vents. He moves to combat and attacks Robert with Narset. Narset triggers, exiling Silence, Narset's Reversal, Cavern of Souls, and Spell Snare. Robert takes the hit, and in his second main phase, ZACK casts Silence. He holds priority and casts Narset's Reversal, targeting Silence. Reversal resolves, bouncing Silence back to his hand and creating a copy of Silence. The copy resolves, and a little dismayed at his Narset triggers, ZACK ends the turn. Jacob draws, not paying for tithe. He floats mana from Sol Ring and casts Dramatic Reversal. Rashmi triggers, revealing an island into his hand. Jacob untaps all of his non-land permanents. With nothing else, he ships the turn. Robert draws, not paying for tithe. He plays a Windswept Heath. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a tropical island onto the battlefield. He casts Nature's Will. In response, Jacob flashes in an Endurance, and Rashmi triggers. Jacob holds priority and casts Brainstorm. In response, Robert casts Swansong, targeting Brainstorm. Brainstorm is countered, and Jacob creates a 2/2 bird. Rashmi's trigger resolves, and Jacob reveals Fierce Guardianship, putting it into his hand. He casts it for its alternative cost, targeting Nature's Will. Will is countered, and Endurance resolves. Endurance triggers, targeting ZACK. ZACK puts his graveyard onto the bottom of his library, and with the stack clear, Robert moves to combat. He attacks ZACK with Najeela. Najeela triggers, creating a 1/1 warrior tapped and attacking ZACK. ZACK takes the hit, and with his plans foiled, Robert passes the turn. At the end of Robert's turn, ZAIN casts Worldly Tutor. He fetches up a Niv Mizzet Perun onto the top of his library. The turn moves to ZAIN. ZAIN draws, Tithe triggers, and ZACK creates a treasure. Still in the draw step, ZACK casts Silence, shutting off his opponents from casting spells this turn. ZAIN moves to combat and attacks Robert with Malcolm. Robert takes the hit, and Malcolm triggers. ZAIN creates a treasure, and he ends his turn. ZACK draws and moves straight to combat. He attacks Robert with Narset. Narset triggers, exiling Shatterskull Smashing, Walk the Aeons, Long-Term Plans, and Jeska's Will. Robert takes the hit, and in his second main phase, ZACK casts Jeska's Will, targeting Robert. Will resolves. ZACK adds 3 red and exiles Karn's Temporal Sundering, Brainstorm, and a Wooded Foothills. He plays Wooded Foothills. He casts Brainstorm, drawing 3 and put 2 back on top. He taps Ancient Tomb to cast Waves of Aggression. Waves resolves, and ZACK moves to a second combat step. He attacks Robert and Narset triggers. ZACK holds priority and casts long-term plans. He searches his library for a card and puts it third from the top. Narset's trigger resolves, exiling Exotic Orchard, enter the Infinite, Lion's Eye Diamond, and a Soul Ring. Robert takes the hit, and in his second main phase, ZACK casts Soul Ring. He casts LED. He casts Enter the Infinite. ZACK draws his library and puts a card from his hand on top of his library. He casts Walk the Aeons, taking an extra turn. He casts Scroll Rack. ZACK doesn't discard a hand size due to Seagate Restoration, and he moves to his extra turn. ZACK draws and moves straight to combat. He attacks ZAIN with Narset. Narset triggers, and in response, ZACK activates Scroll Rack, putting 2 cards from his hand on top of his library. Narset's trigger resolves, exiling Beacon of Tomorrows and Nexus of Fate. ZAIN takes the hit, and in his second main phase, ZACK casts Nexus of Fate. It resolves, shuffles into ZACK's library, and ZACK gets an extra turn. ZACK casts Beacon of Tomorrows. ZACK gains an extra turn, and it shuffles into ZACK's library. He casts Swords to Plowshares, exiling Endurance, and Jacob gains 3 life. ZACK moves to his next turn. ZACK draws and presents a loop of attacking with Narset, activating Scroll Rack, putting either Nexus of Fate or Beacon of Tomorrows on top of his library, exiling both, and casting them with Narset's ability. He takes infinite turns and attack steps, killing the table and winning the game. Ladies and gentlemen, what a game. Congrats to ZACK on his win tonight. ZACK mulliganed aggressively this game, and it paid off. With mana generation from Smothering Tithe and the inevitability of him hitting big with Narset, he was able to close out tonight's game. The most valuable card in tonight's game goes to Smothering Tithe. Normally you see this card paired with wheels to generate mountains of treasure, but this game showed off how great it is by itself. It is what enabled ZACK to generate the mana he needed to not only cast his commander, but have the ability to cast nearly any card in his deck. With his deck packed full of giant game-ending spells, it is only a matter of time before Narset became too much to handle for the rest of the table. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time when we duke it out to see who will be the king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.